Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going on a seriously fascinating journey into the dark, deep waters of the world's greatest maritime mysteries. Now, if you love a good nautical legend, you're absolutely in the right place. But since we're focused learners, we're going to do something just a little bit different today. We are going to strip away the myths, the ghost stories and the sea monster folklore, to uncover the cold, hard, scientific, historical, and forensic truths lurking beneath the surface.
Just listen to this incredibly chilling distress call. SOS from Orang Medan. We float. All officers, including the captain, dead. I die. Wow. This terrifying broadcast, supposedly picked up back in June of 1947, kicked off what is arguably one of the greatest ghost ship legends in history. So, as the story goes, the rescue ship found the entire crew dead, lying flat on their backs, with their faces frozen in just pure, unadulterated fear. Even the ship's dog was dead. And then, before the ship could even be towed back to port, it mysteriously exploded and sank. I mean, it is literally the ultimate spooky sea story. But how much of it is actually true?
Well, that brings us to phase one: fictions, frauds, and myths. Because before we can solve real mysteries, we really have to look at how poor journalism, human deception, and honestly, just our own love for a good story create these enduring legends, like the Bermuda Triangle.
Let's look at the Orang Medan tale we just talked about. Creepy, right? Absolutely. But decades of historical detective work have revealed a pretty shocking truth. The Orang Medan never even existed. No, really, there are zero shipping records in the Netherlands or anywhere else for that matter. The entire story actually originated as a serialized fiction in a Dutch-Indonesian newspaper. It was completely made up by an Italian man named Silvio Shirley. It was just this thrilling romance of the sea that got picked up by reputable newspapers, and eventually people just accepted it as global fact. It's crazy, but it perfectly shows how fast an unverified rumor can snowball into a global myth.
Now, I want you to keep the number 19 in your head. Just lock that in. In December 1967, a Florida real estate developer named Daniel Barak, along with his friend Father Patrick Horgan, were out on a 23-foot yacht called the Witchcraft. They were just 1 mile off the coast of Miami, literally just looking at the city lights, when Barak radioed the Coast Guard saying he hit something and needed a tow. He actually specifically stated it was not an emergency. Well, it took exactly 19 minutes for the Coast Guard to arrive at their location. And what did they find? Absolutely nothing. The Witchcraft had vanished entirely. No debris, no men, in just 19 minutes.
So naturally, the Witchcraft became prime evidence for the whole Bermuda Triangle legend. But a professional research librarian and pilot named Lawrence David Cush decided to, actually look at the facts. He compiled them in his book, The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved. Cush analyzed commercial shipping logs, Coast Guard reports, insurance records, the whole shebang. And he proved that the Bermuda Triangle is statistically no more dangerous than literally any other part of the ocean. And as for the Witchcraft, well, given that they were on a highly trafficked waterway just a single mile offshore and vanished without a single scrap of debris, researchers suggest it was highly likely a staged event. It looks like Brennick might have been looking to abscond and fake his own death. So, no aliens or rogue waves required here, just plain old human deception.
Let's move to phase two, unraveling the Mary Celeste, and see how this builds. What happens when a ship actually is found abandoned, leaving the folklore behind for modern forensic science? Tracing the timeline back to 1872, the Mary Celeste left New York on November 7th, commanded by Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, who is a highly respected, super experienced sailor. Fast forward to December 5th, and the British brig Dei Gratia found the ship drifting about 400 miles east of the Azores, and the discovery was totally baffling. The ship's massive cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, largely untouched. There was a full 6-month supply of food and water on board, but there was not a single soul to be found. The lifeboat was missing, and one of the ship's 2 water pumps had been completely disassembled. It basically became the sea's greatest mystery.
So, you gotta ask yourself, why would a completely rational, experienced captain just abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship? Well, modern documentarian Anne McGregor and oceanographer Phil Richardson applied today's forensic technology to the surviving notes. First off, Briggs's chronometer was faulty. He was actually 120 miles west of where he thought he was, so he falsely believed he was much closer to land. Second, the ship had recently carried coal, and coal dust debris had likely clogged the ship's pump, which totally explains the disassembled pump they found. Without a working pump, Briggs couldn't measure how much water was taking on in his fully packed hull. And finally, while the cargo was mostly intact, 9 barrels were empty. Just 9. But these specific barrels are made of red oak, which is a really porous wood known to leak. So the forensic conclusion? It was a tragic miscalculation. Briggs, unable to measure the water in his hull, smelling those leaking, potentially explosive alcohol vapors, and thinking he was closer to the Azores than he actually was, he ordered an abandonment. He was just trying to save his family and crew from what he wrongly thought was a sinking or exploding ship.
This brings us to Phase 3, the Cause 2 tragedy. Let's shift gears from 1872 to a much more modern ghost yacht mystery, this one from 2007.
The Caz 2 was a 9.8-meter catamaran found drifting off the northeastern coast of Australia. Now, when authorities boarded it, everything looked completely normal. I mean, food and silverware were set out on the table, a laptop was literally still turned on, and the engine was running. The radio and GPS worked perfectly fine, but the three-man crew, Derek Batten and brothers Peter and James Tunstead, were gone. Just gone. The boat had left port on April 15th. A helicopter spotted it adrift on the 18th, and it was boarded on the 20th. But because this is a modern case, investigators had a totally crucial piece of evidence, a video camera. The very last footage, recorded at 10:05 a.m. on April 15th by James Tunstead, showed the men perfectly calm. They were just fishing. But if you look closely, the video also revealed a few really vital details. The water was pretty choppy, the boat's fenders were hanging out, and critically, none of the men were wearing life jackets.
So, piecing together the forensic evidence, that video, and a shredded sail they found, the coroner concluded this absolutely wasn't pirates, and it wasn't a staged disappearance. It was a rapid, utterly heartbreaking sequence of human errors. First, the men's fishing lure was found entangled in the ship's rudder. It's believed James Tunstead fell overboard while trying to free it from the slippery back platform. Second, his brother Peter immediately jumps in to save him. Third, the skipper, Derek Batten, realizes he has to drop the sails before he can even turn the boat around to get them. So he leaves the helm, but right as he does, a sudden shift in the wind causes the boom to swing violently across the deck, knocking Batten overboard too. Now in 15-knot winds, that boat would have sailed out of their reach in mere seconds. 3 experienced men vanished just like that. Which takes us to Phase 4, the brutal reality of nature. We've looked at frauds and we've looked at human error, but we really can't talk about the ocean without acknowledging one fundamental truth. The ocean doesn't need sea monsters to be deadly. The raw, brutal power of nature is terrifying enough all on its own.
Take the famous 1845 Franklin expedition, for instance. 2 British ships, the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, just vanished entirely while searching for the Northwest Passage. For over a century and a half, people endlessly speculated about what happened to those 129 men. But modern searches finally located the Erebus in 2014 and the Terror in 2016, sitting off the Canadian Arctic mainland. There was no grand supernatural mystery here. Extreme, completely unsurvivable Arctic ice conditions simply trapped the ships, claiming the crews to starvation, disease, and exposure.
Now, what's really interesting about this next concept is that for almost a century, sailors who survived massive, spontaneous walls of water were basically called liars. Oceanographers and ship engineers insisted that waves over 30 or 40 feet were statistically almost impossible. But we now know the actual monsters of the sea are very, very real. They're called rogue waves. These are spontaneously forming, massive waves, sometimes reaching over 100 feet tall. And just to be clear, these are totally distinct from tsunamis. Tsunamis are caused by earthquakes and are actually barely noticeable in deep water. Rogue waves, they happen right out in the open ocean.
So how did the experts get it so wrong for so long? Well, under the century-old mathematical model called the Gaussian function, which was used by all the scientists and shipbuilders, you'd almost never see a wave higher than 15 meters, which is about 49 feet. A 30-meter wave was predicted to happen like maybe once in 10,000 years. But the modern ESA Max Wave project completely shattered that illusion. In 2004, using satellite radar over just a tiny 3-week period in the South Atlantic, they identified more than 10 individual giant waves over 25 meters. That's over 82 feet high. These behemoths aren't thousand-year flukes. They are a frequent, terrifying reality that our math completely ignored.
So what actually causes these oceanic monsters to form? We've got 3 main scientific explanations today. First is diffractive focusing. That's where the shape of the seabed literally directs several small waves to meet in phase, suddenly combining their heights into one big wave. Second is focusing by currents. If wind drives waves straight into a strong opposing ocean current, like the Agulhas current off South Africa, the waves compress together and shoot straight upward. But the third one, that's the most fascinating.
It's called nonlinear effects, modeled by something known as the nonlinear Schrödinger equation. To put it simply, an unstable wave can essentially soak up or steal energy from the surrounding waves. It literally sucks the energy from the waves in front of it and behind it, growing into a near-vertical, 100-foot monster out of absolute nowhere before just collapsing back down shortly after.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. We started out by debunking ghosts and sea monsters, replacing them with human deception, tragic miscalculations, and rigorous forensic science. But the truth we're left with is honestly just as awe-inspiring. Think about it. If the ocean can hide a 100-foot rogue wave from our most advanced mathematical models for a century, what else is out there? What other completely natural yet utterly terrifying phenomena are happening right now in the deep, just waiting for our science to finally catch up? The truth of the sea, as it turns out, is often way stranger and definitely deadlier than fiction. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today on The Explainer, and I'll see